The crystal chamber of the Galactic Council was built to make petitioners feel small. On this day, the ceiling, carved from a single block of auric quartz, threw constellations of light over 12 thrones and one empty circle in the middle. That empty circle belonged to Earth. Ambassador Sarah Chen stepped into it like a conductor before an orchestra convinced it didn't need music. The air tasted like static and judgment. The Vorak delegate clicked its many arms in bored impatience. The Zahirian's prismatic skin caught the glow and fractured it into rainbow shards over Sarah's jacket. She raised one hand. "Before you vote," she said, "remember that law without conscience is only a prettier word for power." On distant monitors above them, a survey drone drifted toward Sol, its hull painted in the Council's blue. It transmitted standard warnings in a dozen tongues. It waited for fear. It waited for apology. It found neither. Instead, every wavelength across Sol declined to flinch. 3 jumps away in the dark between stars where most empires stored their secrets, a ship stirred. Long as a mountain range, quiet as snowfall, its name etched into hull plates like a promise made around a campfire, Concord. And as the Council prepared to contain humanity for non-compliance, the ship that should not exist warmed a heart older than steel. Sarah Chen looked up at the votes forming like storm clouds and said the words every history teacher would one day underline. Earth will not be managed. The chamber laughed. The galaxy did not. When Captain Jake Morrison first saw Concord in dry dock, he thought of national parks, those vast American spaces that teach you how small you are and then make you love the smallness. The ship stretched past the horizon of the Jovian yard in an elegant, purposeful line. No skulls, no spikes, no theatrical terror. From the right angle, it could have been a coastline. From any angle, it was a message. Jake ran a palm over the pressure-warmed railing on the command ring and looked down into a well of gently breathing lights. Around him, the bridge hummed at a human pace, not frantic, not lazy, deliberate. "Boot cycle reads green," said Alina Vasquez, operations. "Prometheus lattice holding at 99.8. Quantum gravitic nets spooled. No drift. Copy." Jake kept his voice even. He'd learned in flight school what his grandfather taught in Little League dugouts. The tone of the coach is the heartbeat of the team. Let's keep it boring until it's not. On the main screen, Sol rose like a candle behind thin skeins of dust. Along the inner orbits, civilian traffic moved with the slow confidence of routine, tow trains or barges, Coast Guard sweepers. Off to port, a string of beacons winked from Luna's farside yards. Between them and Earth, a chain of tiny lights, listening posts and sentinel buoys completed a quiet fence. "Council drone entering our perimeter," Elena added. "Broadcasting Article 12 inspection authority." Jake nodded. In the academy, they had taught him the articles as a kind of catechism. He respected good rules. He distrusted rules wielded as scenery for bad theater. "Answer with Annex 4, he said. "Cordial, complete, and final." Annex 4 was the polite American way to say no, and we brought receipts. The boys answered in the clear, Earth's sovereignty recognized by historic claim. Local defense zone activated. Inspection denied under safety statute. Alternate rendezvous proposed at L5. The drone ignored it and continued in. Somewhere beyond Neptune, the Council's picket ships turned their noses toward Sol like wolves smelling cooking smoke. "Captain," Elena said, quieter now, "Sarah's channel open." Sarah's face appeared without preamble, studio light turning her hair into a thin halo. There was a time, Jake knew, when Earth sent soldiers to speak and diplomats to follow. In their century, the sequence had learned humility. "The vote is moving," she said. "Containment if we refuse oversight. Limited blockade first, then escalatory sanctions. They think we'll fold at the docks." "Then we shouldn't look like docks," Jake said. Her mouth twitched. "Deterrence is a language. Speak it carefully." Jake thought of his grandfather again, of the old man's hands polishing a bat not to threaten but to respect the wood. "We'll show them the difference between a fist and an open hand," he said. "Same bones, different intent." He cut the line and looked across his bridge. Human faces, human stakes. The oldest ethical math problem in the world. How do you keep your people safe without becoming what you fear? The quiet answer had guided Concord's design. She carried enough fire to end empires. She carried more tools to avoid needing it. Her greatest weapon wasn't in the torpedo bays. It was an orchestra of discretion. Jam nets that turned enemy guns into statues, gravity sails that nudged trajectories without shattering hulls, microfabrics that could print medpods faster than you could say triage. "Mark the drone," Jake said. "No harm, teach it respect." A pulse left Concord like a sigh. The drone didn't even shudder. It simply discovered that the universe had become sticky, like trying to run in a dream. Thrusters burned, data screamed, and nothing much moved. In the command ring, Alina's eyebrows rose. "Net is holding. We've got its curiosity." "Return it," Jake said. "Gift wrap optional. Send the manual." He watched the dot glide back toward the boundary line, slow as repentance. For a long minute, no one spoke. Outside the glass, Earth turned a cheek of cloud and sun. Down there, kids were in classrooms, teachers drawing arrows on maps, coaches teaching 1,000 little infields to measure their throws, nurses pushing carts across linoleum floors that knew more heroism than any battle. All of that, Jake thought, is what you hold when you hold a line. Alina broke the silence. Council pickets changed formation, looks nervous. Nervous was good, not terrified. Terror led to stupid choices. Nervousness was a sign of a mind doing math. Jake folded his hands behind him, the same posture Sarah adopted in that chamber halfway across the galaxy. "Let them do the math," he said. "We'll help with the variables." At Lagrange 5, the rendezvous beacon lit. The council did not come. History note: students would later memorize this day by a simple clause. Earth enforced a boundary without firing a shot. The lesson that followed was older than spaceflight and newer than every sunrise. Power is the last word you say and the first word you must translate. The first map Jake remembered loving hung in a middle school hallway. Oceans like spilled ink, continents like puzzle pieces waiting for patient hands. In the corner, a cartographer centuries dead had scrawled, "Here be dragons." It wasn't a warning, Jake's teacher said. It was an invitation. Go, see, draw better. Now the map on Concord's main screen showed a thin blue demarcation curving around Sol, and beyond it, a scatter of council signatures marching into position with bureaucratic dignity. On paper, it was a limited demonstration of authority. In practice, it was a hand on your front door knob. Jake's grandmother would have called it impolite. The Geneva lawyers back home would have called it illegal. Both sentences described the same thing. "New hail," Alina said. "Council Commodore, human-accented trade tongue, sounds educated or rehearsed." The Commodore's face filled the display, a bronze-skinned being with eyes like polished shells. The voice arrived smooth as silk on new tires. "Captain Morrison of Sol 3, under Article 12.3, inspection and data seizure. Denied under Annex 4. Jake said, cheerful as a host refusing an uninvited salesman. "We can forward the PDF." Silence, then a tick, some aide whispering off-screen. "Your denial violates the Council Compact." Respectfully, Jake replied, "The Compact binds signatories. Earth never signed. We learned from history. Power without consent is occupation in a nicer suit." He watched the words land. Diplomacy, he'd learned, was less chess than carpentry. Measure twice, cut once. Sand the edges. Concord's sensors plotted tiny changes in the picket line. 3 ships adjusted by a degree. One turned its belly toward Mars, the diplomatic equivalent of rolling elbows. Jake nodded to Alina. She lifted a hand. Nets unfurled faster than thought, not to strike, but to be seen being ready. The Commodore's pupils shrank. Somewhere off-screen, another aide whispered. The feed cut. "Captain," said Marcus Kane from Tactical, "we could nudge their formation off the line. Gravity sails only. They'd never even feel the hand." "And then what?" Jake asked. He wasn't being coy. He wanted his team to practice the whole chain of consequences. "They report we used force. They escalate to save face. We get a spiral. Someone's nephew dies to buy an admiral 10 minutes of dignity." "We could prove we didn't harm them," Marcus offered. Proof is for courts, politics is for stories. Jake said, and stories are about who we are. He let the bridge sit with that. They didn't have to agree. They had to understand what game they were playing. America had learned across centuries that the hardest part of power wasn't getting it. It was not letting it get you. The line between deterrence and bullying is the width of a human conscience on a bad day. Open a narrowband to their Commodore, Jake said. No video, audio only. He waited for the click. Commodore, he said, gentler now, I assume you've studied us. You know our folk tales. We build fences with gates. We leave the porch light on. If you want to see who we are, we'll show you, at L5 with tea strong enough to melt a spoon. But if you put a hand on our latch, you will learn we designed the door. A long breath answered him. Then, we will consider your hospitality. The channel died. On the board, the picket line softened by a fraction. Elena exhaled like a diver breaking the surface. That buys hours, she said. Hours are lifetimes in a crisis, Jake said. Let's use them. He split the bridge into work streams. One team modeled non-kinetic responses that would humiliate no one. Another mapped medevac corridors for ships not yet in trouble. A third wrote plain language briefs for civilian captains. Why the council's move mattered, what to do if hailed, how to remain proud without becoming reckless. Captain, Marcus said after a while, what if they come hard? Jake thought of his grandfather again, of a day behind the church when two bigger kids pushed a friend against the fence. He'd stepped in, not to swing, yet but to stand where it was suddenly inconvenient to bully. The boys left angrier than they'd come, but they left. If they come hard, Jake said, we meet force with limits. We treat their crews as if someday we'll need to live next to them, because someday we will. He let his eyes rest on earth, full as a harvest moon. An invisible chorus rose in him, the litany of civic sermons, the rule of law, equality under it, the stubborn American faith that the individual has a soul and the state has paperwork. He smiled despite himself. Plot a path that teaches before it punishes, he said. Let our first lesson be proportion. Lecture note, in ethics classes they would later call this the Concord doctrine, deterrence by legibility. Don't confuse your opponent. Don't humiliate them. Show the ladder down, then show the floor if they refuse it. It's not mercy instead of strength. It's mercy as a form of strength, old as any good neighborhood. Sarah Chen did not enjoy speeches that sounded like antique furniture. She preferred sentences you could carry up a flight of stairs. But the council chamber demanded performance, and performance was a language all its own. She stood in the well and let her pulse settle into a drummer's patience. On the balcony, students watched with the strange reverence people reserve for moments they don't yet understand. Members, she began, you have called us primitive, unpredictable, dangerously young. May I propose a more useful adjective? Remembering. A murmur ran around the ring. Sarah continued, voice steady. Where I come from, schoolchildren memorize documents written on paper that cracked under fingertips. We measure power by how well it obeys the words that outlive it. We teach that law is not a leash on the weak, but a harness on the strong. This is not romance. It is engineering. It keeps bridges standing. The architect of proceedings, part judge, part stage manager, shifted on his throne. Ambassador, this body has authority. Authority breathes by consent, Sarah said. You call it compact, we do too by other names, but you cannot retroactively draft a planet because it makes your spreadsheets neater. A thin figure in violet, Minister Veller of the Bureaucratic Union, tilted 6 tablets at once. You are a statistical anomaly, Ambassador. The Council's peace predates your combustion engines by millennia. Peace, Minister, Sarah answered, is not the same as quiet. The pax of an empire is a lid on a boiling pot. It says, don't rattle the table and we will call this stability. Our history teaches a different peace, the kind that argues in public and counts the votes out loud. It is louder. It is sturdier. The Vorak clicked irritation. Your planet ignores summons. Your fleets multiply in shadows. You refuse inspection. This is not peace. It is American. The last word slid from its mandibles like a diagnosis. Sarah smiled from a place older than pride. Yes, she said, in our better seasons we disagree with the universe out loud. Across the starfield, Concord turned on the soft lamps that indicate a ship is awake but not angry. Data from the returned drone appeared on Council screens. It showed a net that did not break, a denial that did not gloat, a boundary held without a bruise. The architect leaned forward. "Ambassador Chen, are you telling us that if we decline your invitation to Lagrange 5, your Concord will do nothing?" "I am telling you," Sarah replied, "that we will use the least force required to keep our children from learning fear as a first language. The least force may be none. It may also be more than you can imagine. The difference depends on your imagination." Laughter, then courtroom laughter, the kind that hopes to be contagious. Sarah let it fold and die. She thought of her grandfather's immigration trunk, the smell of cedar and newspaper, the way he taught her that patriotism wasn't the flag on your desk. It was the work you did when no one clapped. "Members," she said softer, "I ask you to risk curiosity. Come to L5, walk our decks, speak to our engineers, learn why our quiet is not a threat but a discipline. And if you fear traps, bring your own guards and your own journalists. We have nothing to hide except the things every civilization hides. Its insecurities, its jokes that don't translate, its love for what it loves." The chamber did not vote, not yet. Politics is a slow machine, but something in the room shifted like a stadium exhaling at halftime when it realizes the visiting team can, in fact, play. Outside, in the mathematics where choices become trajectories, the picket line adjusted again. This time it bent, not away, not toward, but open, a door to a place where adults talk. Civic margin note, teachers later paired Sarah's speech with Federalist essays and dissident poems, asking students to mark every place where humility was used like a lever. The grading rubric rewarded sentences that named this paradox. Calling your power limited is how you make it trustworthy. They accepted. Not the whole council, that would have been too tidy for reality, but a delegation, the Commodore, 2 aides, a jurist from the Zahirian schools, and a broadcaster who wore a dozen tiny cameras like jewelry. They arrived at L5 with escorts arranged not to look like escorts, eyes bright with suspicion and the first spark of respect. Jake met them at the airlock without fanfare. No sabers, no honor guard. He had shaved too close and nicked his chin, which felt perfectly human and therefore perfectly on brand. "Welcome aboard Concord," he said. "Move about as you please. Where you cannot go, it is because a reactor room does not care about politics." They walked. Elena led them past the gravitic coils, explaining how you could bend a ship's inertia the way a good teacher bends stubbornness. Marcus showed them the jam nets and how they turned weapons into embarrassing conversation pieces. In medbay, a row of printers purred, growing sterile gauze splints and, if needed, hope. "You print supplies to care for the enemy?" the broadcaster asked, voice hovering between admiration and a headline. "For neighbors," Marcus said. "Enemies are a use case, neighbors are a plan." They reached a viewing blister that opened over Earth like a cathedral window. The Commodore stood there a long time, hands laced behind a back built for command. "In our academies," the Commodore said, "deterrence means the other must believe you will do what you threaten." "In ours," Jake replied, "it starts with believing we won't do what we don't have to." "That sounds like faith," the jurist said. "It is," Jake said, "but it's not blind. We trial it every generation. We hold hearings. We write and rewrite. We march. We fail and fix. Our worst days are loud enough to scare the good out of us. Our best days are quiet enough to hear it return." The broadcaster adjusted a lens. "Your critics say you have built a weapon too large to be trusted." "We did," Jake said simply. "So we tried to build the crew larger." He gestured to the blister's rim, where plaque after plaque bore names, engineers who refused shortcuts, civilians who testified in open hearings, line workers who broke for lunch and came back because the weld wasn't right yet. The Commodore traced one name with a fingertip. "And if we cross your line?" Jake did not look away. "Then this ship will do what it was born to do, but even then we will count how to leave you a future. Because one day we will dock at the same stations. Our children will share vending machines. Someone's band will play in someone else's park. If we build a victory that poisons that day, we will have defeated ourselves." The delegation finished the tour. In the wardroom, Sarah joined by Narrowbeam and answered questions that were questions and questions that were traps pretending to be curiosity. When the tea cooled and the cameras winked, the Commodore stood. "Captain Morrison, Ambassador Chen," the Commodore said, "we will advise a pause. A pause is a beginning with manners." Sarah answered. They departed. The line outside softened further, tension turning from wire to string. Concord exhaled a human breath. That night by ship clocks, by crew circadian, by the old poetry of fatigue, Jake stood again at the viewing blister. Earth turned. A storm spiraled lazy over the Pacific like a dancer practicing alone. He remembered a sentence from a civics teacher who loved baseball metaphors. Leadership is the art of making tomorrow less dramatic. Elena joined him. "You think they'll vote against containment? I think they'll find a way to call it something else," he said, smiling. "And if they need a story to carry home, we just gave them one that doesn't require a funeral." "Captain," she said, "what if we're wrong?" "Then we do what our ancestors did," he said. "We fix it loud." An alarm chimed, soft as a seatbelt bell. A peripheral net had detected a pattern at the edge of maps, faint, rhythmic, like a knock you nearly ignore. Marcus appeared at their shoulders with eyes gone field narrow. "Not council," he said. "Different signature, old and close." Jake's stomach did the math before his mind. Every frontier carries more than one story. Sometimes the dragons on the map belong to a chapter nobody alive remembers. He looked down at Earth and felt again the weight of stewardship. The promise you make when your uniform isn't a costume but a contract with people who will never learn your name. "Wake the he said, voice low and firm, the way a parent wakes a house without scaring the children. "Plot on the big board. Broadcast an all-hands brief in plain language. We'll teach another class." The board lit, drawing a new line in a sky already full of them. Somewhere in the darkness, something knocked again. It was not hostile. It was not friendly. It was history clearing its throat. The pattern came like weather over a wheat field. Not lightning, not wind, pressure changing, a presence leaning. On the big board it wrote itself as a soft staircase at the edge of Saul's gravity well. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, a longer pause, then a faint harmonic that made the engineers rub their arms as if someone had opened a freezer. Elena ran the analysis twice before she trusted it. It's not council, and it's not random. The carrier rides a gravity ripple like a surfer. Whoever sent this knows how to speak without trespassing. "Intent tells on you," Jake said. "Plot the knock." They found it in a stretch of quiet past Neptune, where comets draw lazy ovals and human maps write the words later and mean never. A small object hung there, blacker than calculation, geometry so honest that every angle felt like a sentence diagram. No antennae, no welcome mat, just a patient thing that had learned to wait. Marcus folded his arms. "Trap." "Maybe," Jake said. "Maybe a test. The kind museum set out with a sign that says, 'Please touch.'" They took Concord in slow, flying like decent neighbors, hails in the clear, transponders loud, guns sleeping behind glass. The object responded by doing nothing at all, which felt less like refusal and more like etiquette. When they reached 10,000 kilometers, a seam along its equator sighed open. Within, a lantern of pale gold bloomed, and the ship's translation stack spat out a single, startling word. "Welcome." The bridge did what all good rooms do when awe enters, it made space. Jake read the metadata aloud like a librarian reading a card from a forgotten drawer. "Archive beacon, unclaimed, constructed by," he paused. No proper noun, just a phrase, those who owed their children a better map. Elena's smile touched her eyes. "My mother would have loved them." The lantern pulsed. Welcome changed to ask. Under it, a ladder of symbols offered protocols. Non-invasive scans, inquiry bans, an invitation to send questions the way you teach shy animals to take food from your palm. Jake thought of county libraries on summer afternoons, the way a librarian would slide a book across the desk and make literature feel like a conspiracy of kindness. He also thought of history's unkind custodians, those who found a door and kicked it in. "We'll go soft," he said. "No drills, no tethered bots with hero complexes, just light language and patience." They sent a question a child might ask, who built you? The answer returned as a mosaic of civics and craft. Hands in many colors, worlds in many temperatures, 1,000 small committees that argued and adjourned and argued again. The beacon had been built by a coalition who believed that power is safest when distributed like parks and libraries, funded, audited, fiercely loved. It had sat in the dark for a very long time. It woke only for civilizations that knocked with proportion. Marcus rubbed his jaw. So it's judging us. Everything is, Sarah said from the narrow beam, her voice tinny with distance and resolve. But not everything judges fairly. The lantern offered a second prompt, share. Below it slots for stories, legal codes, lullabies, the geometry of bridges, the arithmetic of grief. Concord prepared a bundle the way you pack a care package. The Bill of Rights, a baseball rulebook, a family recipe annotated by a grandmother, a map of national parks, a film of the first time a human touched the moon and did not claim it like a thief. Will they understand any of it? Elena asked. Understanding starts with respect, Jake said. Translation is a symptom. They sent the bundle. The lantern grew brighter, then dimmed like a satisfied stove. New words appeared, neighborhood test passed, request second voice. Sarah leaned toward her camera. Second voice? Elena pointed to the footnotes scrolling like fine print. It wants more than one civilization. Its builders feared the smug purity of monocultures. They wired collaboration into the door. Jake looked at the plot where the council pickets had softened into an untidy cordon. He thought of the Commodore's hands at the viewing blister, fingers resting on names. Invite them, he said. In the clear, no theater. Elena's eyebrows rose. Captain, we can't preach consent and hoard wonder, Jake said simply. If this is an inheritance, it must be a shared chore. They hailed the Commodore and told the truth without garnish. Curiosity beat suspicion by a narrow but important vote behind the Commodore's eyes. We will come, the Commodore said, with recorders. Bring them, Jake answered. History prefers receipts. Ethics note. Cadets would later study the second voice clause as design as morality, how you can embed humility into hardware. Some doors open only when rivals choose to turn the handle together. Two ships approached the lantern, Concord, all understated muscle and public school signage, and the Commodore's flagship, angular in the way a law book is angular. They stopped at equal distances like neighbors meeting over a fence they both built. The lantern pulsed once, then split into 3, then 9, then a comb of light that built a corridor without walls. Instruction set incoming, Elena said. It's odd. The oddness was refreshing. The beacon did not ask for passcodes or proofs of force. It asked them to teach. A list appeared, half game, half civics class. 1. Explain a failure you fixed. 2. Describe a law your people obey even when unwatched. 3. Build a simple tool together using only what you can spare. 4. Name the harm you might cause by doing this wrong and how you will pay it back. Marcus whistled low. They designed out swagger. The Commodore's voice arrived over the shared channel, drier than dust and twice as clean. Captain Morrison, Ambassador Chen, will declarations suffice? Declarations are stage lights, Sarah said. The beacon wants homework. They went to work. On Concord, a team assembled a small water condenser from spare coils and a mess hall pan. On the flagship, engineers offered a microfilter. The devices had nothing to do with starflight and everything to do with thinking of strangers on hot days. Together, guided by the lantern's prompts, they built a combined rig that could pull drinking water from shipboard exhaust in emergencies. Not glamorous, Elena said, hands on her hips, cheeks smudged with the honest dirt of solved problems. Glory is a carnival prize, Jake said. This looks like a Tuesday that saves lives. For the second prompt, the Commodore surprised them with a story about a night watch on a distant frontier where the law required commanders to log doubts, not just decisions. We learned that courage without record-keeping becomes myth, the Commodore said, and myths do not hold ships together. Sarah offered the American habit of public minutes, the stubborn ritual of writing down who voted for what and why. The lantern's comb brightened. Good, again. Then came the fourth prompt, the one that made both bridges go quiet. Name the harm and the remedy. It wanted them to acknowledge what could go wrong: stolen inheritance, weaponized wonder, prestige that corrodes into a class system. It wanted a bond posted up front. If either side abused the archive, the other had the right and the duty to close the door. "That's trust with teeth," Marcus said. "Yes," Sarah replied softly. "It's how adults trust." They signed not with glitzy biometrics, but with logs pushed to public space, cryptographic only to the extent that liars would have to work for their lies. The lantern pulsed one last time, then unfolded like an origami bird, remembering it had been 1,000 sheets of paper first. Beyond the open corridor rose a hall of slow lights. No treasure, no throne, just shelves and questions. A field formed around both ships, soft as a civic oath. "It's binding our clocks," Elena said, wonder wrapped around math. "We can enter only at the same rate. You can't sprint ahead while your neighbor strolls." The Commodore said nothing for a moment. When the voice returned, it had acquired a human register that does not show up on spectrograms. "We will walk with you, Captain." They went in, not far. The lantern seemed to prefer modesty over conquest. The first chamber held tools for mapping gravity, as if it were a river you learn to ferry, not a god you try to drown. Another displayed treaties, so old the ink looked like sunsets, between empires that had learned to survive proximity. A third showed failures catalogued without shame. Above the door, in letters the translation stack rendered as if etched into courthouse stone, a sentence weighted like a polite sheriff. "If your pride is hungry, feed IT with work." They emerged hours later, tired the way you feel after moving a friend's furniture. Ache married to satisfaction. Back on the board, the council cordon had loosened further. Ships drifting into the scientific posture civilizations adopt when they smell a discovery that might let their grandchildren live gentler lives. "Next?" Marcus asked. "Next we get political," Sarah said, "because wonder without governance becomes a museum raid." Field manual note: the sideways door protocols would become standard in joint missions. Build something small first, declare your failure modes, publish your minutes, bind your clocks. It made fewer heroes and more adults. The news reached the council chamber while delegates were still practicing their stunned faces. Broadcasters cut to archival footage of empires dissolving with style. The architect of proceedings called a special session. Ministers rehearsed outrages that would photograph well. Then Sarah stepped into the circle and did not rehearse. "We found a school," she said simply. "It admits only group projects." Murmurs rose, the political version of a summer storm. The Vorak clicked fury about jurisdiction. The bureaucratic union asked for forms nobody had invented yet. The Commodore requested the floor, and to a room that had expected rivalry, described collaboration with the precise tenderness of someone recounting a meal shared after a long road. "What do you propose?" the architect asked, chiseled calm flaking around the edges. Sarah set a document on the pedestal, not a manifesto, a manual. Its title made translators earn their pay. The Concord Accords, a charter for shared custody of dangerous good things. Provisions unrolled like planks on a dock. Paired stewardship. Any entrance to the archive requires two distinct polities, neither subordinate to the other. Public minutes. All sessions recorded and published with minimal redaction. Emergency redactions expire by default. Irreversibles rule. Any action that cannot be undone requires a supermajority plus a minority veto preserved for those without fleets. Return tithe. Technologies lifted receive a tithe. Time, training, tools, back to less advantaged worlds, audited by third parties who owe no favors. Closure clause. If either steward abuses access, the other is obligated to seal the door. The archive will recognize and enforce closures for set terms. Lawyers will hate the verbs, Sarah said. Teachers will love the tests. Arrogant, the Vorak hissed. You believe yourselves architects of the new order. No, Sarah replied. We believe ourselves custodians of the line between order and obedience. Back near Neptune, Concord watched the political barometer and prepared for weather. Not everyone loves a commons. Someone always wants a key nobody else has. A splinter of the council, a flotilla long fond of doctrine and short on doubt, broke formation and burned toward the lantern under the rhetoric of emergency custody. The Commodore signaled disapproval. The splinter ignored it. Jake's voice came steady on ship-wide. "We meet them with limits. Write it on your hands if you have to. We are here to keep tomorrow from bleeding because today panicked." The flotilla tried to sprint the bound clocks. The corridor shifted like a teacher moving a quiz to the front of the room. Concord unfurled nets not to break but to embarrass. Engines howled, trajectories sagged. One ship overheated its own pride and lost attitude control. Concord caught it with a gravity mitten and set it spinning gently like a chastised top. In medbay, printers woke and grew humility in sterile shapes. "We can hurt them," Marcus said, jaw tight. "We can help them," Jake answered. "Which one teaches the class we want to teach?" They broadcast in the clear not to score points, but to leave a record a reasonable person could follow. To the splinter ships, Elena Reed, "You are violating the paired steward clause and endangering crews who didn't vote on your speeches. Stand down. We will treat you like neighbors even as we refuse you like thieves." The Commodore arrived with the rest of the line and did the bravest thing a commander can do, took responsibility in public. "By the authority of this line and my own signature, cease and return," the Commodore said, throat raw from a decision that felt like treason and tasted like leadership. The splinter obeyed by degrees, then by necessity, then by something like relief. In the council chamber, votes clicked like abacuses. A majority accepted the accords with the cautious enthusiasm bureaucracies reserve for the inevitable. A minority invoked the irreversibles rule to add teeth where the prose had gone soft. Sarah watched compromise and felt the peculiar American comfort of seeing a messy process outperform a tidy threat. She keyed a narrow beam to Concord. "We made a law," she said. Jake exhaled. "Now we have to deserve it." Civics note: the Concord Accords would later be filed in school curricula between the Federalist Papers and a recipe for cornbread. Two texts about binding communities with common sense and a shared table. They inaugurated the archive not with fireworks but with a lesson plan. 2 crews, 2 classrooms, 1 corridor of light. Children on Earth watched from gymnasiums where the sound systems were too loud and the teachers knew to turn them down. Children on far worlds watched from halls that smelled of disinfectant and ambition. The first module taught water, not weapons. The second taught how to build an argument you could sleep near. The third taught what to do when you are wrong and still in charge. On Concord, Jake visited the plaques again. Some crew had taped a handwritten sign beneath them: "If found, return to future." He laughed like a man who hears a good sermon he didn't know he needed. Elena joined him with an engineer's fidget and a poet's stillness. "We could have lost this," she said. "We still could," he answered. "We will if we forget why we wanted it." "What's the shortest answer?" "Because our kids deserve maps with fewer dragons." The Commodore requested a final walk through the lantern, and this time asked to bring journalists with difficult questions. Jake agreed and added students who would ask better ones. They walked together, not as rivals under truce, but as coaches trading drills. In one chamber they found an exhibit called the Apology Room, a space where captains recorded regrets with instructions for their successors. Jake stood there longer than he meant to. When he spoke, it was not for the cameras. "I will make mistakes," he said. "Hold me to this, I will make them in daylight, and I will fix them where I broke them." Sarah's last speech of the season did not soar, it landed. "We said in that first hour that Earth will not be managed," she told the chamber, voice threaded with the gravity of ordinary days. "Let me add the sentence that completes the thought: Earth will be accountable, not because you demand it, but because our grandmothers do, because the teachers do, because one day our children will read what we wrote and ask if we meant it." The vote to suspend containment and adopt the Accords passed by a margin that would bore historians and delight parents. The splinter commanders faced public minutes and private reckonings. The Commodore accepted a new role that sounded bureaucratic and turned out to be holy, keeper of the clocks, the officer who certifies that nobody runs ahead in halls meant for pairs. A year later, measured not by calendars but by habits, the L5 complex smelled like a campus on the first day of fall. Paint drying, coffee cooling, hope showing up early to get a good seat. The beacon still pulsed, patient and unamused. Street vendors in orbit sold terrible sandwiches and perfect tea. In a public square with no gravity but lots of decorum, a brass plaque bore a sentence from the lantern's first chamber. If your pride is hungry, feed IT with work. On the ship that began as a debate and became a promise, Jake wrote his own entry for the apology room and then went to the viewing blister. Earth turned below like a vow whispered and kept. He thought of baseball season and school board meetings, of courtrooms and cookouts, of all the small places where a civilization practices its reflexes until they become character. "Set our patrol," he told Alina. "Slow arcs, plenty of time to wave back." "To whom?" she asked, smiling. "To whoever knocks next." Epilogue note for teachers. When students ask why the heroes refuse to sprint, show them the clock-binding field and the paired door. Then ask them to design a rule their town could live by for 100 years. Grade not the elegance of the language, but the kindness of the consequences. Remind them that on the day Earth stopped apologizing, it didn't stop explaining. That is what power is for, to build a future you would trust with your name.